My sister got me arrested in my wedding dress. The charges she filed destroyed her instead. My sister Diane had been obsessing over the Rosewood Vineyard since she was 15. She'd drawn pictures of herself getting married there, created Pinterest boards with thousands of photos, even drove there monthly just to walk around the grounds pretending it was her wedding day. The only problem was she wasn't engaged, wasn't even dating anyone. But in her mind, that vineyard belonged to her future wedding, and anyone else using it was stealing her dream. When I got engaged to Oliver and he suggested Rosewood, I didn't know about Diane's obsession. I just thought it was beautiful. We put down the deposit, sent out save the dates, everything was perfect, until Diane found out. She didn't scream or cry, she got quiet, which should have been my first warning. "That's not fair, Olivia," she'd said calmly. "You know I've always wanted to get married there." "I didn't know. You never told me. But I shouldn't have to tell you. Sisters just know these things. You're doing this to hurt me." 2 weeks later, expensive jewelry started going missing from houses in our neighborhood. Mrs. Walsh's diamond tennis bracelet, the Hendersons' anniversary rings, Mr. Kim's Rolex. Small enough thefts that people noticed days later, after the items had been moved around. The police started investigating, going door to door, asking questions. Diane volunteered to help coordinate neighborhood watch meetings. She was so helpful, so concerned about everyone's safety. She even made flyers about securing valuables and distributed them personally. 5 days before my wedding, I was doing final dress fittings when police showed up at the boutique. They had a warrant to search my car based on an anonymous tip. I laughed at first, thinking it was a mistake. Then they found Mrs. Walsh's bracelet in my glove compartment, the Hendersons' rings in my spare tire well, Mr. Kim's watch wrapped in tissue in my gym bag. I kept saying I didn't know how they got there, that someone must have planted them. The detective, Officer Ruiz, seemed skeptical. These items were hidden in 3 separate locations in your vehicle, all wrapped carefully. All from houses you've been to recently. I had been to those houses. Diane had asked me to help deliver her neighborhood watch flyers. She'd stayed in the car while I knocked on doors, saying her ankle hurt from yoga. I'd left my car unlocked each time. They arrested me right there in my wedding dress. The seamstress was still holding the pins. Oliver got the call while he was at work. By the time he made bail, I'd spent 6 hours in holding. My wedding week ruined. But something bothered Officer Ruiz about the case. The tip had been too specific. The caller had known exactly where each item would be, down to which pocket of my gym bag. He pulled the recording of the anonymous tip. The voice was disguised, but the caller had said something odd. "Check her car, especially the gym bag in the trunk. The blue one with the side pocket. She always keeps valuables there when she thinks no one's looking." How would a random tipster know about my specific gym bag? Or my habits? Ruiz got suspicious and started checking traffic cameras near the theft locations. That's when he saw something interesting. My car at each house? Yes. But also Diane's car, parked 1 street over each time, arriving before me and leaving after. He decided to visit Diane for routine questioning. Just gathering information, he said, checking if she'd noticed anything unusual. Diane was too eager to help. She pulled out a notebook where she'd been documenting suspicious behavior. Look, she showed him. I wrote down every time I saw Olivia acting strange. Coming home late, being secretive about wedding expenses. I think she needed money for her fancy vineyard wedding. Ruiz studied the notebook. These entries are very detailed. You've been watching your sister closely. Just being protective. Sisters look out for each other. She's getting married at Rosewood Vineyard, you know. Always had expensive taste. That struck Ruiz as odd. Why mention the venue? He asked more questions. Diane started rambling about how some people didn't deserve nice things, how they took what belonged to others, how the universe had ways of stopping selfish people. Then she made her mistake. You should also check her old purse, the brown leather one. She probably hid evidence there too. But Ruiz hadn't mentioned finding anything in a purse. And I didn't own a brown leather purse. However, when they checked Diane's apartment, they found a brown leather purse in her closet with receipts from pawn shops. She'd been selling the stolen items after planting duplicates or similar pieces in my car. The real diamond bracelet had been pawned. A fake one had been planted on me. The pawn shop had Diane on camera selling each item. The owner remembered her because she'd said she was raising money for her sister's wedding, that it was a surprise gift. How generous, he'd thought. When confronted with the evidence, Diane broke down. She told me everything. She confessed to planning it for months, stealing from our neighbors just to frame me, making sure I'd be arrested right before my wedding. Officer Ruiz sat across from me in the police station conference room and explained that all charges were being dropped immediately. Diane was arrested instead for theft, fraud, and filing a false police report. The relief hit me so hard my hands started shaking on the table. I couldn't stop them from trembling even when I pressed my palms flat against the cold surface. But underneath the relief was something else, something hollow and sick. My sister had done this on purpose. She'd looked at me and decided I deserved to be destroyed because I was getting married at a venue she wanted. Officer Ruiz kept talking about evidence and confessions and how the district attorney would be in touch, but his voice sounded far away. I nodded at the right times, but I couldn't really hear him. All I could think about was Diane staying in my car while I delivered those flyers, knowing she was planting stolen jewelry in my glove compartment and my gym bag. She'd watched me walk up to each house, innocent and clueless, while she ruined my life one hidden bracelet at a time. Oliver showed up 20 minutes later. I heard his voice in the hallway before I saw him, asking which room I was in. When he came through the door, he didn't say anything about the charges being dropped or ask what happened next. He just walked over and pulled me up from the chair and held me. That's when I started crying. Not the relieved kind of crying, but the kind that comes from somewhere deep and broken. He didn't try to make me stop or tell me everything would be okay. He just stood there with his arms around me while I sobbed into his shirt. Officer Ruiz quietly left the room and closed the door behind him. We stood there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. When I finally stopped crying, my face felt swollen and my throat hurt. Oliver handed me tissues from a box on the conference room table. We had to leave eventually. I couldn't hide in that room forever even though I wanted to. When we walked out through the police station lobby, I saw neighbors in the waiting area. Mrs. Walsh was there with her husband. The Hendersons were sitting near the window. They'd probably come to give statements or follow up on their stolen items. They all looked at me. Even though they knew now that I was innocent, even though Officer Ruiz had probably told them Diane confessed, I could feel their stares following me across the lobby. Mrs. Walsh opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but then closed it again. I walked faster, keeping my eyes on the exit doors. Oliver's hand was warm on my back, guiding me forward. The drive home was quiet. Oliver didn't turn on the radio, and I was glad because I couldn't have handled music or talk shows or anything normal right then. I watched the familiar streets go by, the same route I'd driven 1,000 times. Everything looked exactly the same as it had this morning when police showed up at the boutique. The same houses, the same trees, the same stop signs. But everything was different now. When we got to our apartment building, I realized I was still wearing the clothes from the police station, not my wedding dress. They'd let me change before processing me. But in my mind, I'd been wearing that dress for 6 hours straight. I'd felt the weight of it, the tight bodice, the pins the seamstress had been holding. I could still feel it even though I was in jeans and a t-shirt. We climbed the stairs to our second-floor apartment. Oliver unlocked the door and we went inside. The apartment looked wrong somehow, too normal, like it hadn't gotten the message that everything had changed. My wedding binder was still on the coffee table where I'd left it this morning. The seating chart I'd been working on was spread across the dining room table with little name cards arranged in careful rows. Oliver closed the door behind us and locked it. He suggested we call the venue to explain what happened, that maybe they'd be understanding about the situation. But I couldn't think about the wedding right now. I couldn't think about flower arrangements or seating charts or the first dance song we'd picked. All I could think about was my sister in a police interrogation room, confessing that she'd tried to send me to jail because I was getting married at Rosewood Vineyard. My phone was on the kitchen counter where I'd left it this morning. When I picked it up, the screen lit up with notification after notification. 63 missed calls, more than 100 texts. I scrolled through them with shaking hands. Most were from family members who'd heard about Diane's arrest. My Aunt Karen had called 7 times. My cousin Michelle had sent a string of texts asking what was going on and if the rumors were true. Uncle Rob wanted to know if I needed anything. But the messages that made my chest tight were from my mother. The first one said she'd heard something terrible happened and was I okay. The second one said she'd talked to the police and there must be some mistake. The third one said Diane would never do something like this. The fourth one said I needed to call her immediately. The fifth one said, how could I let them arrest my own sister? They went on like that, getting angrier with each message. She went from confused to defensive to furious. But none of them, not a single one, asked if I was okay after being arrested. None of them said she was sorry I'd been put in handcuffs at my dress fitting. It was all about Diane and how this would affect Diane and what would happen to Diane now. I put the phone face down on the counter and walked away from it. The buzzer rang an hour later. I was sitting on the couch staring at nothing when the sound made me jump. Oliver went to the intercom and a familiar voice came through the speaker. Maya Reeves, my best friend since middle school. Oliver buzzed her up without asking if I wanted company. 2 minutes later, she was knocking on our door. When Oliver let her in, she was carrying bags of Chinese takeout and 2 bottles of wine. She took one look at my face and said she was staying the night. She didn't ask what happened or need me to explain. She just set the food on the coffee table, moved my wedding binder to the floor, and sat down next to me. Oliver got plates and wine glasses from the kitchen. Maya opened the containers of food, but I couldn't eat. The smell of fried rice made my stomach turn. She didn't push it. She just poured wine into my glass and sat with me while I tried to process that my sister had tried to destroy my life over a wedding venue. Hours passed. Oliver fell asleep in the bedroom around 11. Maya and I stayed up on the couch, not really talking, just existing in the same space. Sometimes that's all you need from a friend, just someone who shows up and stays. My phone rang early the next morning. I'd finally fallen asleep around 3, still on the couch with Maya on the other end. The ringing pulled me out of dreams about police stations and wedding dresses. Officer Ruiz's name was on the screen. I answered with a voice that sounded like sandpaper. He told me Diane had confessed everything during her breakdown yesterday. She'd admitted she'd been planning this for months, ever since I announced my engagement. She'd started stealing from neighbors specifically to frame me. She'd kept detailed notes about my schedule, when I'd be vulnerable, how to make it look convincing. She wanted to ruin my wedding so badly that she didn't care if I went to jail. She actually said that during her confession. She believed I deserved it for stealing her dream, for taking the venue that belonged to her imaginary future wedding. Officer Ruiz's voice was gentle when he told me this, like he knew how much it would hurt. He said the district attorney would be in touch about next steps, and there might be paperwork, statements, possibly testimony if Diane didn't take a plea deal. I thanked him and hung up. Maya was awake, watching me from the other end of the couch. I told her what Officer Ruiz said. She didn't look surprised, just sad and angry at the same time. The knocking on my apartment door started before 9. Loud, insistent knocking that made Maya sit up straight and Oliver emerge from the bedroom looking confused. I knew who it was before I opened the door. My parents stood in the hallway, my mother's face red and puffy from crying, my father looking like he hadn't slept. They came in without waiting for an invitation. My mother started talking immediately about how Diane had always been sensitive, how she'd struggled with anxiety and depression, how maybe this was a mental health crisis and not a criminal act. She paced around my living room talking about therapy and medication and how we needed to support Diane through this difficult time. My father stood near the door looking exhausted. He kept trying to apologize, but my mother talked over him every time. Neither of them directly said what Diane had actually done. Neither of them used words like felony or fraud or false accusation. They talked around it, like if they didn't name it clearly, then it wasn't real. My mother finally stopped pacing and looked at me. She asked if I was going to press charges, like I was the one who'd made this choice. I told her the district attorney would handle that, not me. She said I could tell them to drop it, that I could refuse to cooperate. I said I wouldn't lie to protect Diane. My mother's face went hard. She said I was being cold and unforgiving, that family was supposed to stick together. Then she left, pulling my father with her. The apartment was quiet after they were gone. Maya squeezed my hand. I met with Lucian Stafford 3 days later. Maya had recommended him, said he'd helped her cousin with something complicated a few years ago. His office was downtown in a building with marble floors and too much air conditioning. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and a firm handshake. He listened while I explained everything, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and explained my situation. Legally, I was cleared. The charges had been dropped and wouldn't appear on background checks. But the arrest record existed. It was public information that anyone could find if they looked hard enough. Future employers might see it. Landlords might see it. It could follow me even though I was innocent. He recommended getting it expunged, which would take time and paperwork and possibly court appearances. He also suggested a restraining order against Diane. She'd be in jail for a while probably, but eventually she'd get out. Did I want her showing up at my apartment or my workplace? And there was the possibility of a civil suit for damages, emotional distress, reputation harm, the cost of legal fees. He said it gently, but clearly. This wasn't over just because the criminal charges were dropped. Clearing my name completely would take work and time and money. I signed the papers to retain him. Walking out of his office, I felt tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. Oliver and I drove to Rosewood Vineyard the next afternoon. I'd been putting it off, but we couldn't avoid it anymore. The event coordinator, a woman named Kendall who'd been so excited about our wedding, met us in her office. She was sympathetic when we explained what happened. She said she'd seen the news coverage and felt terrible about the situation. But she was also firm. Our date was only held for another week before they'd have to release it to someone else. They had other couples interested, a waiting list of people who wanted autumn weddings at Rosewood. We were supposed to get married in 4 days. 4 days from now, I should have been putting on my dress for real, walking down an aisle saying vows. Instead, I was sitting in Kendall's office trying to explain why we couldn't possibly celebrate anything right now. She understood. She really did seem to understand. But business was business and dates were dates. We left without making a decision. In the car, Oliver asked what I wanted to do. I didn't have an answer. The doorbell rang that evening. Oliver answered it while I was in the bedroom avoiding my phone. I heard voices in the living room, multiple people talking quietly. When I came out, Mrs. Walsh, Mr. Kim, and both Hendersons were standing in my living room looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Walsh's eyes were red like she'd been crying. They'd come to apologize, they said. They felt terrible for believing I could have stolen from them. They should have known better, should have questioned the evidence, should have trusted me. Mrs. Walsh actually cried while she talked, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Kim kept saying he was sorry, over and over. The Hendersons stood close together, holding hands, looking miserable. I told them it was okay, that I understood, that they'd been victims too. But I could see it in their faces, in the way they couldn't quite meet my eyes for more than a second. They were uncomfortable around me. Being falsely accused had left a stain they couldn't quite forget. Even though they knew I was innocent, even though Diane had confessed, something had changed. They'd seen me in handcuffs. They'd believed, even briefly, that I was a thief. That image wouldn't go away completely no matter how many apologies they offered. They left after 15 minutes, promising to be there if I needed anything. The apartment felt emptier after they were gone. Oliver locked the door and came to sit next to me. We sat there in silence, both of us thinking about weddings that might not happen, and families that were broken, and neighbors who would always remember the day I got arrested in my wedding dress. 2 days went by in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Zachary Randolph, the district attorney, called me on the morning of Diane's arraignment. His voice was calm and professional when he explained that the case against her was basically airtight. They had her confession on record, the pawn shop footage showing her selling the stolen items, and all the evidence she'd planted in my car. He said the evidence was so strong that he expected her lawyer to push for a plea deal pretty quickly. Then he said something that surprised me. He thought it might be better if I didn't come to the arraignment hearing. Seeing Diane in court could be really hard, he explained, and there wasn't much point in putting myself through that stress when the outcome was already clear. I felt relieved when he said that. I'd been dreading the idea of sitting in a courtroom and watching my sister get formally charged with crimes she committed against me. Having permission to stay away felt like someone had lifted a weight off my shoulders. That evening, Oliver asked if we could talk. My stomach dropped immediately. Those 4 words never meant anything good. We sat down on the couch and he looked nervous, picking at a thread on his jeans. I braced myself for him to say we needed to call off the wedding completely. Instead, he suggested we postpone it for 3 months. He wanted to do something smaller, he said. Just the people who actually showed up for us when everything went wrong. Maybe 40 or 50 people instead of the 150 we'd invited. And he thought we should pick a different venue, somewhere that didn't have all this pain and drama attached to it. Not Rosewood, somewhere new where we could start fresh. I started crying, but this time it was relief. He wasn't leaving me. He just wanted to give us time to heal and celebrate properly, instead of forcing happiness while everything was still raw. The next morning, I called the wedding planner. My hands shook while I dialed her number because I was expecting her to be angry about losing the deposit and all the work she'd put in. But she was surprisingly kind when I explained what happened. She said she'd been following the news coverage and felt terrible about the whole situation. When I told her we wanted to postpone and find a different venue, she didn't even hesitate. She said she had connections with a small garden venue about an hour outside the city that specialized in intimate weddings. It had flowering trees and string lights and a gazebo for ceremonies. She thought they might have availability in 3 months if we acted fast. The idea of starting completely fresh somewhere new made me feel like I could actually breathe again. Like maybe this wedding could be about me and Oliver instead of about everything Diane had destroyed. My mother called that afternoon. I heard her crying before she even said hello. She begged me to think about what this was doing to Diane's future. Did I really want my sister to go to prison? Did I understand what a criminal record would do to her career prospects and her whole life? She kept saying that Diane was sick, that she needed help, not punishment, that families were supposed to forgive each other. I told her that Diane had made her choices and I wasn't going to lie to protect her. I'd spent 6 hours in holding wearing my wedding dress because of what she did. The charges against me were dropped, but the arrest was still on my record. Diane had been willing to destroy my entire life over a wedding venue. My mother's voice got cold then. She said I was being unforgiving and cruel, that I was choosing revenge over family. Then she hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone for a long time after that. Maya came over the next day to help me draft a victim impact statement for Diane's sentencing hearing. We sat at my kitchen table with my laptop between us, and Maya asked me to describe everything I felt during those 6 hours in the holding cell. Writing it all down made me realize how close I'd come to having a criminal record that could have ruined my career. I worked in finance, and background checks were standard. If Diane's plan had worked, if Officer Ruiz hadn't been suspicious enough to dig deeper, I could have lost my job, lost my reputation, lost everything I'd worked for. And Diane had known that. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she planted that evidence. She hadn't just wanted to ruin my wedding. She'd been willing to destroy my whole life because I'd booked a venue she wanted. Officer Ruiz called me a few days later with news that made everything even worse. During their investigation into Diane, they'd discovered she'd been stealing from family members for years. Small things that wouldn't be missed right away. My grandmother's pearl earrings that she thought she'd misplaced, my aunt's silver bracelet that disappeared after a family dinner, even some of my own jewelry that I'd assumed I'd lost when we moved apartments last year. All of it had been pawned by Diane over the past 3 years. Ruiz said they'd tracked down the receipts and matched them to items that family members had reported missing. Diane had been systematically stealing from everyone close to her and using the money to fund her obsessive planning for a wedding she didn't even have a groom for. She'd been buying wedding magazines, paying for venue tours, even putting deposits on dresses at bridal shops, all with stolen money. I started seeing a therapist the following week. Her name was Dr. King, and she specialized in family trauma. Our first session was mostly me crying and trying to explain how my sister could hate me enough to do something like this. Dr. King helped me understand that Diane's obsession with Rosewood wasn't really about the venue at all. It was about control and jealousy that had been building for years, probably since we were kids. The vineyard had just been the thing that triggered all that resentment to come pouring out. She asked me questions about our childhood, about times when Diane had seemed jealous or possessive of things. I remembered dozens of small incidents that I'd brushed off at the time. Diane getting upset when I got better grades. Diane sulking for weeks when I got into my first choice college. Diane making snide comments about Oliver when we first started dating. All of it had been leading to this. 3 weeks after Diane's arrest, Zachary Randolph called with an update. The prosecution was offering Diane a plea deal. If she pleaded guilty to all the theft and fraud charges, she'd serve 18 months with possibility of parole after 12. She'd also have to pay full restitution to everyone she'd stolen from, which added up to over $30,000 between the neighbors and family members. Lucian, my lawyer, told me this was actually a pretty fair deal. If Diane went to trial and lost, she could get up to 5 years in prison. The plea deal would save everyone the trauma of a trial and guarantee that she faced real consequences. I asked Lucian what he thought I should do. He said the decision was mine, but he thought the deal was reasonable given everything she'd done. Diane accepted the plea deal 2 days later. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week. I'd been avoiding thinking about whether I wanted to attend, but Lucian said it would be powerful if I read my victim impact statement in person. So I went. I walked into that courtroom and saw Diane for the first time since everything happened. She looked smaller somehow, thinner and paler, sitting next to her lawyer in a gray suit. When my turn came to speak, I walked up to the microphone and read the statement Maya and I had written. I described those 6 hours in holding, the humiliation of being arrested in my wedding dress, the fear that I'd have a criminal record. I talked about the neighbors who still looked at me differently, even though they knew I was innocent. I explained that I could never trust Diane again, that she'd broken something between us that couldn't be fixed. The whole time I was reading, Diane stared down at the table. She never once looked at me, not even when I described how much she'd hurt me. Not even when the judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison. My father reached out separately from my mother a few days after the sentencing. He asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. When we sat down, he looked older than I remembered. He admitted that he'd known for years that Diane had problems with jealousy and obsessive behavior. He'd caught her going through my things when we were teenagers. He'd noticed how she fixated on stuff and couldn't let things go. But he'd never thought she'd go this far. He'd always told himself it was just normal sibling rivalry, that she'd grow out of it. He asked if I could forgive him for not protecting me better, for not seeing how serious her problems were. I told him honestly that I didn't know yet. I was still processing everything, and I wasn't ready to hand out forgiveness to anyone, but I was willing to try to maintain a relationship with him if he could respect that I needed time. He nodded and said he understood. Then he paid for both our coffees, and we sat there in silence for a while before going our separate ways. The wedding planner called 3 days later with information about the garden venue. Oliver and I drove out there on a Saturday morning, both of us quiet in the car because neither of us knew what to expect. The place was tucked behind a row of old oak trees, nothing like the sprawling vineyard grounds Diane had obsessed over for years. We walked through a wooden gate into a small garden with stone pathways and flower beds everywhere, string lights hanging between the trees even in daylight. The woman showing us around explained they could fit about 50 people comfortably, maybe 60 if we squeezed. I looked at Oliver and saw him smiling for the first time in weeks. Really smiling, not the tight, worried expression he'd been wearing since my arrest. We booked it right there, put down a deposit for 3 months out, and when we got back to the car, I felt something shift inside me. Not happiness exactly, but something close to it. Excitement, maybe, or hope that our wedding could actually be about us instead of about everything Diane had destroyed. The neighborhood took longer to feel normal again. I'd go to the grocery store and see people I'd known for years suddenly become very interested in the produce section when I walked past. Some of them would mumble hello without making eye contact. Others just pretended they didn't see me at all. Mrs. Walsh was different, though. She started waving at me every single time our paths crossed. Big, obvious waves like she was trying to make up for doubting me. She'd call out my name across the parking lot and ask how wedding planning was going, her voice too loud and too cheerful. I appreciated what she was trying to do, even though it made me uncomfortable. The Hendersons never apologized directly, but they left a fruit basket on my doorstep with a card that said they were sorry for everything. Mr. Kim nodded at me once when I was getting my mail, and that was it, just a nod, but I could tell he felt bad about the whole thing. People still talked, though. I'd catch fragments of conversations that stopped when I got too close. See neighbors clustered together on their front lawns looking over at my apartment. The Fletcher sister situation, that's what they called it. Like giving it a name made it easier to gossip about. My mother's email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was drinking coffee and trying to decide if I wanted to go to work or call in sick again. The subject line just said family therapy, and I almost deleted it without reading. But I opened it and found 6 paragraphs about how she'd started seeing a therapist to process having one daughter in prison and another daughter who wouldn't return her calls. She wrote about how hard it was to visit Diane at the correctional facility, how small and scared Diane looked in her uniform. She said the therapist was helping her understand that she'd handled everything wrong, that she'd been so focused on protecting Diane that she'd failed to support me when I needed her most. But she never actually said the words, "I'm sorry." She never admitted that defending Diane after everything that happened was wrong. Instead, she asked if I'd consider meeting with her after the wedding, maybe doing a family therapy session together. She said she wanted to rebuild our relationship, but she needed time to figure out how. I read the email 3 times and then closed my laptop without responding. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I didn't know if I ever would be. 2 months passed faster than I expected. Diane's sentencing happened. The neighborhood gossip died down a little, and Oliver and I focused on planning a wedding that felt right for us, instead of trying to live up to some perfect vineyard fantasy. Maya called me one Friday afternoon and said she was throwing me a bachelorette party whether I liked it or not. She'd invited just 5 people, the friends who'd actually believed in me when everyone else was whispering behind my back. We drove up to a cabin in the mountains. Nothing fancy. Just a small place with a fireplace and enough beds for all of us. We spent the weekend cooking together and playing card games and laughing until my stomach hurt. Nobody mentioned Diane or the arrest or any of the awful stuff that had happened. We just existed together as friends, reminding each other that life could still be good even after everything fell apart. On the last night, Maya gave a toast about how proud she was of me for not letting Diane's actions define my future, and I cried a little, but in a good way, the kind of crying that feels like relief. My wedding day came on a bright Saturday in October. Oliver and I got ready in separate rooms at the venue, and I could hear music starting outside as guests arrived. 40 people showed up. Just 40. But they were people who'd chosen to be there for us when it mattered. My father knocked on my door when it was time, and I took his arm, both of us pretending not to notice my mother sitting in the 3rd row with tissues already in her hand. We walked down a stone pathway between the flower beds while someone played guitar, and Oliver was waiting for me under the string lights with the biggest smile I'd ever seen on his face. The ceremony was short and simple, just the words that mattered and nothing extra. I noticed the empty chair in the family section where Diane should have been sitting, but I didn't let myself think about it too long. Oliver squeezed my hand during our vows, and I squeezed back, both of us knowing we'd gotten through something terrible together and come out stronger on the other side. When the officiant said we were married, everyone clapped and cheered, and I realized standing there that the best revenge wasn't making Diane suffer or proving I was the better sister. The best revenge was building a beautiful life with someone who chose to believe in me when it would have been easier to walk away, surrounded by people who showed up when I needed them most.